For today's top stories, let's go over to the CBN News Desk.
Gordon, Israel and Hamas began observing a 5-hour humanitarian truce today to allow aid into the Gaza Strip after more than a week of fighting. And there was an unconfirmed report of a possible permanent ceasefire starting tomorrow. Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
The truce will bring quiet to the area for the first time since Hamas began its barrage of rockets nearly 2 weeks ago. So far, the terror group has fired well over 1,000 rockets into Israel. Israel continued its aerial bombardment to stop that rocket fire, but tragically, 4 young Palestinian boys died in one strike on a Gazan beach. Paul Hershen from Israel's foreign ministry says Israel strives to avoid civilian casualties.
That the Israeli military is taking every possible step that it can to avoid civilian casualties. You can see it, it's online, with all the film footage is there of pilots flying in, reporting that they see people, and the control saying to them, cancel, go away, move on, come back. Messages going out, leaflets being dropped, phone calls, SMS messages, people being asked to evacuate. We're telling them where we're going to strike in advance of a strike. This is unheard of in military history.
On the diplomatic front, Palestinian Authority Mahmoud Abbas visited Cairo to help broker a ceasefire, while President Barack Obama said the U.S. would continue its diplomatic efforts.
The Israeli people and the Palestinian people don't want to live like this. They deserve to live in peace and security, free from fear. And that's why we're going to continue to encourage diplomatic efforts to restore the ceasefire, and we support Egypt's continued efforts to bring this about.
While the diplomatic efforts go on, the IDF continued its preparation for a possible ground offensive. Israel called up 8,000 more troops. That raised the number of troops to 56,000, gearing up for an incursion to stop Hamas rocket fire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel would use as much force as necessary to restore quiet. He also said Israel accepted a ceasefire endorsed by the UN and the Arab League, while Hamas rejected it. Hamas reportedly wants the release of Hamas prisoners and the opening of the Gaza border crossings. Netanyahu also raised the idea of a demilitarized Gaza. In the meantime, he said, Israel would do what it needed to do to protect its citizens. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thanks, Chris. A lawsuit brought against Meriam Ibrahim, the Christian woman sentenced to death in Sudan, has been dropped. Reuters reports her Muslim father dropped the lawsuit to formally establish her as his daughter. The move could clear the way for her to leave Sudan and come to the U.S. Ibrahim was sentenced to death in May on charges of converting from Islam to Christianity. Her Muslim father and his family insisted she belongs to them. But Ibrahim says she was born and raised Christian by her mother while her father was out of the picture. Well, they call it the blue flu. That's when police call in sick to protest a city policy. That's what's happening in Memphis right now, and it ties into Obamacare. Chuck Holton has that story.
Hundreds of police cars sitting idle in one of the highest crime cities in the nation. It's just the latest unintended consequence of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare, that went into effect this year. The Memphis City Council recently decided to cut health care benefits to city employees and retirees. It's a move that will deliver a devastating blow to retired police and firefighters. The change will raise premiums by 20% for existing employees and cut some uninsured spouses. But the real pain will be felt by retirees who are being dropped altogether.
Now you're looking at putting people in a position where they either got to choose to eat and get their medicine or versus their insurance.
Thomas Malone is the president of the Memphis Firefighters Association.
By saying that they had to pay 100% of a premium, that their part would go, for a family, would go from about $320, $325 a month to about between $1,600, $1,800 a month.
Police and firefighters are also angry that the city's new health care policy wasn't completely written before it was voted on and passed, reminding Malone of the Affordable Care Act itself.
There you go. You pass something and nobody read it, that's what we got here. You know, we got a smaller version of what occurred in D.C., and that's what's happening here.
Beale Street here in downtown Memphis is the hot spot for nightlife on a weekend. Typically, on a weekend night like this, there would be 70 or 80 police officers canvassing this area. but tonight is at least a third less than that. That's because many of the officers in Memphis are calling in sick to protest the changes to their health care policy.
The city has had to bring in sheriff's deputies to make up the difference. Meanwhile, the police union is considering litigation. Clyde Keenan represents the city's retired police officers.
Well, we're going to be asking for an injunction in court to prohibit the city from going forward with this plan at all. The retirees that we've got, particularly those in their 70s and 80s, this would be a catastrophic hit. We literally would have people dying without medical care. Doctors are not going to see these people free of charge.
This appears to be part of a larger trend. Keenan claims the city administration met with officials in Washington before unveiling their plan.
Our administration has met with the people in Washington and apparently got the idea to force our people onto the Affordable Care Act. But most of our people are not eligible for affordable care.
City employees across America routinely opt out of Social Security, instead choosing to fund their own pensions and insurance. But if these kinds of changes take hold, many more retired public servants could find themselves looking at a very difficult road ahead. From Memphis, Tennessee, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
The Justice Department investigation of the IRS now includes looking into the disappearance of Lois Lerner's emails. The tax agency says Lerner's emails were lost in a hard drive crash. Lerner is a key figure in the scandal over IRS targeting of Tea Party and other conservative groups. The death toll is now above 40 in the Philippines after a powerful typhoon hit parts of the country, and it could still go higher. The typhoon brought gusts of wind up to 100 miles an hour and left millions of people still without power. And you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.